Welcome to my talk, Using AI in Software Design, how ChatGPT can help with creating a solution architecture. I'm quite happy that the room is full. I hope that everybody will take some takeaways home. Some few words about me. My name, Ralf D. Müller. I work at DB Systel, the IT partner of the German Railway. My interests are mainly documentation, docs as code, a little bit of security, OS2, architecture, and now AI. I'm a maintainer of Doc Toolchain, an open source documentation, docs as code project, and I'm contributor to Arc42. You can easily find me on the internet, find my email addresses. So if you want to contact me later, this is not a problem. A short disclaimer. When you use ChatGPT, be aware of dangers. Data protection might be a problem. Don't send private data, personal data to the system. And there's also a problem with copyright because ChatGPT might generate copyrighted info. That's very visible when you work with images. It's not so visible when you work with text and code. But I wanted to say this up front, and don't do this with a real exam. I'm talking now about the iSAQB advanced exam. For those who don't know it, iSAQB is the International Software Architecture Qualification Board. They have a certification process for architects, and they have an example task exam, which I will try to solve with ChatGPT, but you are not allowed to use ChatGPT in the real exam. So don't use those approaches for the real exam. Another short disclaimer. I'm not the AI expert specialist. I'm a prompt engineer. I use AI and ChatGPT. I'm not too familiar with the backgrounds, but nevertheless, I want to talk about the basics, how ChatGPT works, because you have to know it in order to use it. And many people call those large language models like ChatGPT a stochastic parrot, not better than the auto-completion of your mobile phone. It's a neural network, and it just produces some probabilistics for the next word which might follow, and this looks like something intelligent. That's what people say. I say it's might be more the all-knowing monkey. And why I think it's the case, I will now try to explain. It starts with comparing the GPT-3 versus the GPT-4 model. Both are generative pre-trained transformers. That's, transformer. It can transform text, so it can translate text, or it can translate, for instance, also your code from Python to Java, something like this. And it is also capable, I guess, raise your hand if you already have used ChatGPT. Yes, so everybody. Who has used ChatGPT 4, the paid model? Wow, many people. I would say 50%. So you all know what GPT is. That's great. Let's take a look at the difference. So GPT-3 was trained on 550 gigabyte of text data. GPT-4, they say many terabyte. They say it's not really known. You don't get too much information about what is behind those models, what is behind this technology. But some data leaked and some people estimate about it, and yeah, so these are the results. And the parameters, so the weights of the neural network, for GPT-3, it is 175 billion parameters, and for GPT-4, it is said to be 500 billion parameters. So there is a huge difference between those models, between the free version and the paid version. And there's also a huge difference between the free GPT-4 model, which you can use with Bing, Microsoft Bing search, the chat with Bing, and nowadays it's called renamed Copilot. It behaves in a different way. So GPT-3 is for, to get the real thing, the real stuff, you have to pay. Currently, I think it's $20, but it's worth it. So that's my first tip. If you really want to work with ChatGPT, then pay for it. It's really worth it. That is another comparison, so that there is a test, an academic test, and there are lots of tests which they have applied to those models. And GPT 3.5 scores 65%, the average human 75%, and GPT-4 82%. The reasons why those models reach those scores are different. They know a lot, they have seen nearly the whole internet, and that might be the best reason why they score so high. People argue about whether there's really reasoning behind it or not. But if you want to work with such a model, these figures count, because it's important that you get the real stuff and not the silly answers from the stochastic parrot. When you search for the architecture behind ChatGPT, you get lots of scientific papers, and you often get this transformer architecture. And yes, if you are the AI expert, you will understand this picture. I'm not the AI expert, so I made up my own architecture. And so what we know is that at the core is a neural network, and we have text input, we have natural language processing. This is already quite important, because your text will not just fed to the neural network. There's a language processor before it, so that it understands the difference of words. For instance, whether when you talk about Washington, whether it's the person or the city. This is fed to the neural network. Then there's again some kind of output processor and text output. But that's not everything. Because we have a context, we just not only feed your question to the model, but we also have a context. When you chat with a model, you build up context. I will tell you a little bit more about this later. And there's a so-called mixture of experts. It seems that there's not only one neural network at the core, but several expert neural networks. So that might be also a reason why some questions are better answered than others. And it's multimodal. What does it mean? We not only can feed text to the machine, we can also feed images to the machine. There's an image recognition, which then results in some textual output. There's DALL-E 3, for instance, as output processor to generate artistic images, not diagrams, just artistic images. And we have voice recognition. And we also have text-to-speech output. And we have a lot of more things, like the code interpreter. And that's, for instance, an interesting point, because nowadays when you have the code interpreter enabled because you have the paid model and you ask the model mathematical question like what's the square root of 15, it will not respond from its neural network. It will create code for the code interpreter to calculate the answer. Lots of plugins available, and that's it about the architecture. What I think it's important. It's also important to know that when you use ChatGPT, you have the predefined front end, and you have to take what it gives you. Soon you will notice that you will have more freedom if you work with the API and build your own front end. Oh, sorry, there is a typo with the context. You will notice a lot of typos in these slides. Please, I'm sorry for that. Let's talk about the context of the model. When you start to chat with the model, you will enter some priming. I'm a software developer working on a web-based application with Spring Boot and MySQL. So the machine knows something about you, something about the context of the problem. You then start to chat with the machine, and everything what you exchange with the machine adds to the context. And the API is stateless, so every time you send a new request, the full context is sent to the machine. And the first problem occurs when you get out of the context. In the beginning, the context was quite small. I think currently ChatGPT 4 has a context, so there's a chat front end of 8,000 tokens. A token is something between one character and a word. And when you reach the end of the context, your first messages will get out of context and it will forget about your priming, about the main problem. And so it will drift. It will drift with its answers because it doesn't know about the beginning of the session. Interestingly, it somehow depends on the front end, because I investigated a little bit more in the context and noticed that ChatGPT starts to compress the context by reducing its own answer size to something, sometimes just, hey, I've answered the question of the user, that's it. So it keeps your statements but compresses its own statements to work around this problem. GPT-3 was said to have 2,000 tokens. GPT-4 some months ago had 32,000 tokens. These are the token sizes, or token size of the model. When you use the front end, the front end is relatively cheap. They avoid to give you the full context size, which is at the moment 128,000 tokens. So if you use the chat, I think you have around 8,000 tokens. If you use the API, you can get the full set. So first priming tip, I started to start every session with the prompt that ChatGPT should start every response with a greater sign. Why? Because it produces markdown output, and in markdown it's just the quote mark, the line on the left, and this way I can see whether my first statement ran out of context or not. It works quite well for some chat front ends. So as I said, if it compresses its own answers, this will not work, but it's somehow an indicator, and it shows you that you have to be a little bit creative when you work with the system. Embeddings. Embeddings is also something quite powerful, and this is only a short introduction to embeddings. The neural network is already trained, and you can't easily change it. And the solution to give your model your own data, or to give ChatGPT your own data, your own documents you want to work with, for instance, your code, is to put your code in a context. If you have limited context, then you can't put your whole document, your whole code in a context. When you have the huge context through the API, is a 128K context, you could put it in the context. I mean, that's enough for some books, but it gets costly. If the context is full, you pay, I think, 1 cent for 1,000 tokens. So you pay more than €1 per request if the context is full. So the solution is to break down your text, your context you want to embed, into fragments, into chunks, and put those chunks in a vector space, turn those words into vectors and store them in a vector database, so that with every request you can take a look at the vector space, see your own prompt is near which chunks in the vector space, and just use this chunk or some of those chunks to embed into the context to talk with ChatGPT about your data. Again, it's a matter of how many chunks you embed, but that's a good way to work with your own documents, your own data with such a model. Again, we have huge context available, but it's also a little bit costly. And now with knowing about all of this, I think the model ChatGPT, the API, is quite powerful, and with those embeddings, it can have access to the data of the whole world, not only the weights of its neural network. You can use a browser plugin, for instance, so that it can search for its own data. You can embed your data, and so ChatGPT knows everything, can retrieve everything, but it's not too good at reasoning like an all-knowing monkey. But let's get started. Let's talk about prompt engineering. Priming, the preparation. When you start to work with ChatGPT, every session starts from scratch. There were some changes to let ChatGPT memorize some information. It's not rolled out to all users at the moment, but there are some workarounds. But you still have to keep in mind every session starts from scratch. ChatGPT doesn't know about the other sessions you already had with it. So you have to prepare it. You have to tell it what the context is you want to talk with. You have to tell it about the goal you want to achieve in this session, and you should also tell it how the solution should look like. So, for instance, context that you are a Java developer and your goal is to create some kind of algorithm, and the solution should be a library. Here's an example of a context, and what I found quite interesting with this example is I mean, an experienced software architect, I don't like JavaScript, and I created an image through DALL-E. I asked ChatGPT to create an image, and it depicted me as quite old. I thought about it. I thought about how can I change this bias, and I told it, "Hey, I really like JavaScript. I like front-end code." And yes, okay, take a look at this old-style calculator and all those books. Okay, so it got me. I'm old. So I also extended this context to give ChatGPT some knowledge about my experience, so it knows what it can expect, what I already know, and I don't want to put in this whole context with every session. So OpenAI said, okay, we can fix this. There's a feature called custom instructions. What would you like ChatGPT to know about you to provide better responses? It's a limited field, input field, but it's enough to put in this context so the results will get better. And that's some kind of long-term memory. You sometimes have to go back to it to brush it up, to add some experience you gained and maybe remove some. So that's really helpful. And there are not only the custom instructions, but also how would you like ChatGPT to respond? And I found some interesting information on the internet, what you can write. And for instance, here this start every response with a greater sign. And this was a mistake because it will keep this in the session. So this doesn't work in a good way. But everybody's talking about the hallucination of the large language models. Provide accurate and factual answers, which basically says, don't lie to me. And there's also no need to disclose you're an AI. So, you know, those lengthy discussions where the system always tells you, hey, there's an information cutoff, and yes, I'm only an AI, and wow, these prompts will shorten the answers and save you some context and bring the discussion to the point. Yeah, leave out all politeness phrases, answer shortly and precisely. Regarding politeness, it seems the way that it makes sense to be polite, to say thank you. Because the model was trained with the whole data of the internet, and if you are polite, you get the part of the internet where people are polite. If you're not polite, you get the bad parts. At least that's what Scott Hanselman reasoned in a talk by him. He's from Microsoft. And I also added, I like to document things and I like to use ASCII-Doc instead of Markdown. And so I told the system, when you create a document, please create ASCII-Doc output and also how I want to have it formatted. So for instance, when you work with ChatGPT and want to produce some code, you can also, this is a place where you tell ChatGPT which libraries you normally use, which libraries the system should avoid, so that you don't have to fix that in every session. I also start every session with a little bit of small talk. I ask the system whether it knows about the technologies and the things I want to talk about. So here I ask, whether it knows iSAQB. And this way it creates its own context. I don't have to tell it about it. It retrieves this information from its knowledge and puts it into the context. That's, from my regards, it's quite helpful. I also asked it about the advanced level certification before I start to solve the advanced level certification with it. And I also used the feature that I can upload PDFs to upload the rules of the certification, so it knows about it and can stick to the rules. Also a glossary. It was available, so it makes sense that the system knows about it. And it's quite convenient that I can just upload those documents as PDF, but there are limitations. Now, we have primed the system. We have the example task. It's called Big Spender. It's a web-based application. And I tell the system it should read the document and not start with the task yet, with solving the task. It summarizes the document, so I see, yes, it seems it has read the document, but it extracts the text from the PDF, not the images. In this document, there are two images, a business context and a business class model. And I already had some experience and knew that it will not extract those images. So I got those images and also uploaded them. And it's interesting that it can recognize those diagrams. If you ask the system whether, what's visible on this diagram and what kind of connections there are, it is quite good at telling you. It recognizes the content. But it's only quite good. It's not perfect. So I also had the idea when I started to solve the problem to tell the system before you solve a task, check if you have any questions regarding the task and ask me those questions. That was just a test. And oops, it came back with 10 questions. Wow! That was a great experience. And you can even, for instance, if you want to decide on a library or you are looking for a library or something like this or a tool, you can tell the system, hey, I'm looking for a library, please ask me questions and then make a suggestion. It works. And you can answer these questions one by one or in one long prompt. It works. Great. There's one example, the regulatory requirements. And that is something I made a mistake. I gave a wrong answer and poisoned my session through this. Because of this wrong answer, which was the answer was more important for the system than the given task, and so it made some wrong decisions based on my answer. First subtask, quality attributes. Again, I asked the system to repeat the task in order to create some context. So I'm sure that it really knows about the task and the task is freshly in the context. It worked. What's interesting here, it didn't look up the document again. It just knew it. And so I started to repeat the task and told it to derive the quality scenarios. And hey, it created me an ASCII table. That's what I wanted. And it looks quite good. Okay, the importance of everything is high, only one medium. But that's okay for a first start. What I didn't do is to dig deeper into this. If you take a deep look at the results, yes, they are okayish, but no, you won't succeed with the exam with those results. Create a utility as a graphic. Wow, it told me not only here is a source code of PlantUML, a text to diagram library, it created a file and said, here's a file to download. It was something new to me. Normally it just created the source code and I had to copy and paste it. ChatGPT can't create diagrams, not with this front end. If you build your own front end, you can use, for instance, the Croquis server, which is capable of creating diagrams. And that's quite interesting because if you tell the system, here's a tool, use it, it uses the tool, it will get very likely a syntax error. The syntax error will be sent back to the API, and the API say, oh, sorry, wait a moment, I will fix this. It will iterate over its own source code and come up with a good example. And here, yes, utility tree. Looks like a utility tree, not the best, but yes, we have a result. And now I could go deeper into discussion with the system and help the system to come up with a better result. Now, yeah, identify and weight key quality goals. So I mean, the content of this is not so much important. It's just important that you see what the system is capable of. I ask it to explain the motivation in 2 to 3 sentences, create a table with a column ID, and yeah, the motivation should be in a line by its own, which has a call span of 3. It is capable of doing so. And I think that's quite good. And now that I prepared the system with just some subtasks, I asked it to create those subtasks. And then I asked it to create the final solution for the task and also create some introductory text. And yes, it created an ASCII-doc document with all the information. And I was quite happy. I think that's quite a surprisingly good result. Second subtask, a solution strategy. Repeat the objective for the second subtask as stated in the document. As you can see here, we can rephrase our statements. So it took 3 approaches in this case to find the proper prompt. When I said repeat the objective for the second subtask without as stated in the document, it wasn't correct. So I added this as stated in the document. And as you can see, it then started to again look up the document. When you do it this way, when you rephrase your prompt, it helps to keep the context short. If you just create a new prompt, which is rephrased, then you add to the context and maybe poison your session because the first results were not as good and maybe retrieved wrong information, and this poisons your session. So always use the feature to modify your prompt. So in this way, it worked that it repeated the objective. I asked it to solve the solution strategy, and it came up with yeah, a solution strategy. That's okay. And it said it needs to confirm a few aspects. In the beginning, I told the system to ask questions when it needs some more information, and here it used this and said it needs to confirm some things. For the solution, it needs, for instance, to know about the deployment environment, scalability, and so on. And so I gave it this information, in this case, one more complex prompt. And it came up with a solution strategy. I was a bit surprised. You haven't now read the whole task, but it really sticks to the task. I would have described the solution strategy as free-form text, but the task really requires to name the key constraints, assumptions, and basic principles, and it does it this way, so it really follows the task. Now I was worried about the context and asked the system how much is left. It says 2,000 tokens out of 4,000 tokens. This information is not reliable. It doesn't really know about the context. Some front ends show you the context. What's interesting, if you ask it to save the whole context in a file, it will start the code interpreter and write with Python the context to a file, and then you will see that it maybe already compressed the context. At this moment, I thought, okay, I wasn't aware of the problems with this, but I, reloaded the answer, and now I got 8,000 tokens. So it's not really reliable, and the greater sign is gone. Don't know where it's gone. But here, it's back again. As you can see, don't know. Okay, third subtask, technical context. Yeah, in the original task, it's stated that you have to create a technical context, which is defined as a black box. And in the task, it also states you should create an overview of purchased and open source parts. But if it's still a black box, you don't have purchased and open source parts. So it's the system just left this out. I'm not sure whether it noticed that it doesn't make sense or whether some other problem. So let's see. So I asked the system to create a context diagram with a C4 model notation by Simon Brown, and it came up with something very trivial. That's not useful. That's plain wrong. So I thought about it, and there's a technique, give the model time to think. Again, build up context. Let's start to work on the technical context. First, name all actors, then name all external system, then name all external interfaces. And now I get an overview. This is exactly what I want to see in the technical in the context. Yeah. And now I repeated my prompt, and now I get a good technical context. So this method that the system first has to tell you which steps it plans to take will give you better answers. And that's not only for the diagram, that's for everything. There's a easy mistake which you can do when you ask the system to solve a problem, and then explain it to me, that's the wrong way around. Because it first solves the problem in the wrong way and then explains the wrong way to you. Ask the model to first explain how it will solve the problem and then solve it. Now, with a business structure, it's nearly the same. I knew that it will come up with a not so good result, so I already gave the model time to think and got a better result. Then we have the technology stacks, the next task. And here it's quite interesting because it didn't manage to repeat the objective. And I was quite surprised. Why not? And I took a look at the original document and found out that there's a page break in between. And that is a problem for the system because it extracts all the text, and I'm not sure what it does with a page break, with a footer. I guess it will also extract the footer. It is somehow in between the task, and this results in the problem that it can't really retrieve the task. As a workaround, so if you have it under your own control, if you use the API, you would fix it that you will recognize the footer. In this case, I could only do the workaround that I put the whole text of the task in the context, and yes, then it worked quite well. It came up with a business context, and the task was to map the business context to the technology stack, and it came up with some workflow on the left and with the systems involved and the contribution to quality goals. I'm quite impressed with this. About the context, wait a moment. It says everything's fine. Now it has 8,192 tokens. Okay. So it doesn't really know about itself. Now I had to state read the full objective with the next task. And here it should weight the scenarios, quality scenarios by risk. I was quite, those results are quite okay. Sorry, I'm a bit running out of time. And now I again ask about the context. And now it noticed, okay, it thinks that we have used up more tokens than we really have available. And now it says the earliest parts of our conversation are no longer in the immediate context. This is something you always have to keep in mind, the context. The context is quite valuable. You have to use a model which has enough context which for your task, for your session, and keeps the context somehow in mind. Now, the conclusion. I'm quite happy what I learned from this experiment. And I'm quite surprised about what the model is capable of. It can transform the exam input to a solution output. It is a transformer. It works quite well with this. It needs guidance. You have to tell it what to do. You have to take a look at the output, verify the output, get into a feedback loop. As I told you, with a diagrams plugin, it can get itself into the feedback loop. If you give it a code interpreter for your language, you can create a Java code interpreter. You can do test-driven development. You can give it a problem. You can give it some expected output, and it will create code, verify the result against your expected output, and iterate over it. That's really great. Yeah, you can even put those results it created again back as prompt into the machine and ask it whether it's a good result or not. And it will find its own shortcomings. Yeah. There's an examiner, Eberhard Wolf. I had some YouTube video sessions with him to go through the answers, and no, those answers are not good enough to be accepted. ChatGPT would have to rework it. And the oral exam afterwards, after the homework, as you all know, we can create video, we can create text-to-speech. So the future is near that such a model will also be able to pass an oral exam. The main tip I want to give you is pay those $20 for the paid model. It's really worth it. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I will be around. Just approach me.